Okay, welcome back to the Chase MedSearch Podcast. My guest today is Michael Blackwell. Michael was most recently Vice President and Managing Director for India at Medtronic in their Asia Pacific region. Michael has 23 years of sales and leadership experience in medical and pharmaceuticals. At Medtronic, he has worked in the neuromodulation business, the restorative and minimally invasive surgical therapies. He's worked in developed markets, emerging markets, and has lived in the US, Canada, Singapore, and India. He's had about 10 careers packed into one, and he's still a young guy with a lot more to go. Michael attended the American University located in Washington, D.C., and played D1 basketball there while in school. Welcome to the Chase MedSearch Podcast, Michael.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Great to be here. Really excited for today.
Yeah, great to have you on, man. I've known you, I don't know, 15 years, something
At
like
least.
that.
Yeah.
I remember when you joined Medtronic back in the day as a rep, and I think it was Rick Carrion was involved in that process, and he was very, very excited about you, as he should have been, because look at your career. So it's great to see you, even if it's long distance. And I always enjoy doing these kinds of leadership profile sketches. And if there was ever a Renaissance man in business, it's you. You have done a lot of things. But let's talk about just kick it off with college basketball at American University. What was that experience like? You were team captain there at one point, right?
Yeah. No, listen, I think for a lot of young men and women, athletics becomes a way up and out. And
Yeah.
born and raised in a small town, and then
Okay.
being whisked away to Washington, D.C., and the murder capital of the world. Um, my education started there, but basketball was phenomenal to me and opened up countless doors. And really the basis kind of a lot of who I am as a person, as a leader, just building that competitive edge, focusing on how important the team is, leading with a culture, being accountable, all those amazing things that come with athletics.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Topeka, Kansas.
Topeka, Kansas. So you really changed geography, culture, everything going over there.
For sure.
Important question, do you hold yourself to the same standard of fitness today as you did when you were playing basketball?
Actually, I joke all the time. I'm in better shape now than I was when I was in my 20s. Uh,
Golly.
and so, if I was doing the things now if I was doing the things then that I'm doing now, I probably maybe would not have had a career in medical devices. It might have been a professional athlete. So,
Wow, that's great, man. That is great. Well, I always love to take my guests and say, okay, step back in time. You're playing ball, then you get a pharma job, right? And you're in pharma for a while. Tell us about breaking into medical devices, because it is the number one question that I get on my podcast, that I get in my professional career as a recruiter in medical devices. How do I get in, from a lot of young people and not so young people that just want to be part of what's going on here, and they're on the outside looking in. So, maybe just tell us, how'd you get in?
yeah, I think my story will resonate with a lot of your listeners, because when I worked for Pfizer for 6 years, and I remember about year 3, I was thinking, gosh, this is so exciting, but I want more, and started looking over at the medical device world. And so I started having early conversations, and the conversation was, oh, you don't have enough experience yet, on one end. And then the other end was, well, if you get too much experience in pharmaceutical, then we don't want you then either. So Jordan, something you've heard countless times and given education to. So I think the one thing that I tried to do as a pharmaceutical rep, breaking into that, was finding ways to do more, finding
Mm.
ways to do more than just your job. Fortunately, I had 3 different jobs in 6 years with Pfizer. I was a field rep in Kansas City, and then a hospital rep in Madison, Wisconsin, and then was promoted to a manager and went down to Atlanta. But it's not so much those promotions that I think helped me get to medical devices, but it was the idea of, what more can I do? It was the idea of, what extra things, how do I network more
Mm-hmm.
so? I tell a lot of people that ask me the same question, go find a job that you're wearing scrubs. And that
Yeah.
seems kind of funny, but
Hmm.
that puts you in the setting. So you have the background, you have the education, you have some, 2 to 4 years of sales experience, and now you're in the hospital. And now you have an opportunity to really network both with all the companies that come calling on the hospitals, but also the physicians and the relationships that you can build wanting to do more and being really specific and focused, maybe in a therapy that you're most interested in, and just be resilient. I mean, you just like the hiring cycle for device reps is ongoing all the time.
Hmm.
So it's okay to fail, to fail, to fail. You just have to keep trying, you will land it. And if the more flexible you can be, I think when I look back at my career, all the different positions I had, and we may get into that, across Medtronic, I had
Hmm.
11 different roles, but I always made myself really easy and flexible. So what happened?
Yeah.
I traded favors. So if the company needed something from me or someone to go somewhere that might be not as attractive, I was the first to raise my hand. And therefore, on the back end, when promotions and other opportunities came up, they were quick to push me forward.
There's so many great points in that. And one theme that you hit on that I tell people all the time is, the hiring cycle in medical is ongoing. Just because you didn't get it this time or the last time or the last time, if you really want this, you got to keep showing up and you got to keep going after it, because when time and opportunity meet, there you go. There's your luck. Preparation, opportunity, that whole saying, really holds true in getting into medical devices. So great points all there. But once you got in Las Vegas. So how did you get to Vegas from Atlanta? And I think the point needs to be made. You were a manager in pharma, right, at that point, and then you took a rep job to go
Yeah.
in device, right?
Yeah, actually, it's even worse than that. So I was a
Okay.
manager with Pfizer. I actually
Yeah.
took an associate in-house rep position first. So I think, for your listeners, you
Yeah.
have to be willing to make a choice or a sacrifice in order to
Mhm.
get what you want. I knew I wanted a career in devices. I was willing to leave a manager level role to take an in-house associate rep job. And believe me, I was frustrated every day thinking there's so much more I can do. There's so much more I can do. And so I went through the training courses of both perfusion and heart valve therapies, and I'm just waiting for opportunities in the country. And sure enough, one came up in Las Vegas and no one wanted to go there. So to my point earlier, I raised my hand, talked to that Rick Carrion we talked about before,
Yeah.
and
Great.
4 months as an associate rep, I then became a sales rep one in Las Vegas. So that's the
Yeah.
journey from. So I was in Minneapolis actually for those 3 or 4 months, going through training as an associate rep until an
Mhm.
opening came up that put me directly in the field.
Yeah, Vegas is one of those markets, man. People who, I think so much of the country goes there to party and have a good time. They're like, why wouldn't I want to live here? But then, it is so hard. It's such a difficult market to recruit in. You put your hand up, you went there, and you stepped into a role, I think, in deep brain stimulation. Is that right?
Yeah, no.
When you,
So I first went over as a heart valve perfusion rep, and
oh,
then
okay. Yeah.
and so I did that role for a year, and then there was some Medtronic was talking about potentially selling off one of the businesses. So a
Hmm.
mentor of mine had kind of reached in and said, "Hey, we want to make sure we protect this talent. You may
Yeah.
think about another business." And that was probably my first networking where one of my mentors talked to his friend who was VP GM of the neuromodulation business, where there happened to be a job in Vegas in deep
Mhm.
brain stimulation. And so I interviewed with that manager and switched over and that's kind of what landed me in neuromodulation.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And once you got into device, you just tore it up professionally. You'd been tearing it up in pharma, and then took a step back to get into device, and then you just got in and just started rocking the house. A lot of people that I end up giving these podcasts out to and sending and texting them and saying, "Hey, listen to this guy's story or listen to this gal's story." What were your keys for success to stepping in? You had some professional experience at that point, but what advice do you give people for doing well right off the bat in medical devices and getting off to the best start they can?
Yeah. So number one, you got to hit your numbers. Number one. I think when I looked at the difference between pharma sales and medical device sales, it was enormous, right? And that's part of the challenge in bridging the gap from pharma or any other sales that don't have hard sales like medical devices. And I think the first thing you have to do is you have to put your head down. You have to learn everything you can about your therapy, about your customers, and you have to hit your number on a quarterly basis, right? Like that is the bare minimum. And that's how you get people's attention. It's the consistency that you bring on hitting the number. And I think about, like, everybody asks me this question: how long do I need to stay in this job? How long do I need this? Pretty much every job is you need a couple cycles, I think the bookmarks are 1 year to 5 years. And I can get into kind of that philosophy of, sometimes there is a job you can only be in for 1 year, and I have that example. There's other jobs that you just need to see more sales cycles. And sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
I got caught as a regional coronary manager in the Pacific Northwest, which is the healthiest region in our country. And
Right. Yeah.
selling coronary stents is a little
Yeah.
trickier than Alabama and Mississippi and
Yeah.
Georgia, and I got
Yeah.
caught needing to hit numbers, and that slowed me up. So, while you're focused on hitting your numbers, you have to also then, what more can you pick up along the way? How do you
Yeah.
build, intrinsic relationships? How do you build out a portfolio? How do you interact with the company at multiple levels? How do you raise your hand for things that come? I think
Yeah.
there's a huge difference. And Jordan, I know you do a good job of telling people, of letting your manager know that you're willing to do more, versus going to your
Mm-hmm.
manager and saying, hey, I was thinking that I could start this initiative, or I could grab a couple other
Mm-hmm.
people and we could build this book journal club for these physicians. And so, whether or not it's about that initiation. You'll hear me
Yeah.
countless times say to myself, what more can I do? What more can I do? So I look at what my goal is, and I figure out, have I done everything I possibly can? And then I exhale and I wait to see what
Yeah.
happens. And I wanted to say one other comment kind of before. I said, failures happen all the time. I failed countless times. You're going to fail countless times. But here's the difference between real successful leaders and everyone else: is you take those failures and you make them an investment. And that is probably the
Mm.
number one piece of advice I could give everyone: is you have to turn your failures into investments into who you are and who you want to be. And if you do that, then all of a sudden you even look at failures differently. You look at them as, here's my opportunity to grow. Here's my opportunity to think about or do something different.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'd love to hear just a little more about that, failures into investments, because, I tell people, I say, you never go negative in interviews. You never, if you're going to talk about experiences you've had as challenges, you want to frame it positively and talk about what you got out of it and show you, hey, you're like the last man standing in the movie 300 or something. You're fighting to the end. You're never giving up. But I haven't thought about turning that phrase into investment. So tell us a little bit more about that, because I
Yeah,
think people will get a lot of value out of that.
sure. No, and I think the other part is, like, when you don't get a job, I don't care at whatever level, the immediate thought is, man, I was rejected. And the reality is, you were not rejected. You simply weren't selected.
Hmm.
And trust me, it's critical that the sooner you learn that, the better you'll be. But
Yeah.
when you raise your hand and you go for a job, okay, and I've told so many people this story, or think, because there's 10 different reasons you could not get the job, and you can't ever let your emotions rule the day or boil over. You have to go through the process. You win the job, congratulations, that's great. And remember, you won the job based on what you've done up to that point. You don't win the job for what you're going to do. Okay?
Right.
Let's say the job goes the other way. You don't get the job. You need to sit, wait, listen, and observe. Well, who did get the job? And then you have to
Mhm.
take an honest look in the mirror and say, is that person better than me? Or what did that person have that I didn't have? 9 times out of 10, you're going to come to an understanding, if you're honest with yourself, that was probably a better hire for that company or that leader at that time.
Mhm.
So then you have the opportunity, and why we talk about why do you make a failure an investment is there's an opportunity to say, okay, I didn't get this job because of X. Now I need to go figure out how to get X. And
Yeah.
that's how you move from
Mm.
failure to investment.
Yeah. That's terrific. Wise advice. And we have a number of college students that listen to this, and I hope this message gets through to them loud and clear, because that is absolute dynamite. You're in medical devices, you're tearing it up, you get promoted, you get that. Now you've been a manager before in pharma, now you're manager of medical devices, and you talk about the selection process. That is a really hard job to get in medical devices, to
Yeah.
become a sales manager and be responsible for a frontline team. A lot of people want to make that transition in their career, never get that opportunity. You got it pretty quick. Why do you think that was, as you look back in the
Yeah.
past and say, what were you doing? What do you think positioned you for that? What advice? Also, I'm just picking your brain on advice
Sure.
today because you've done it. Um, what advice do you have for people who want to make that leap?
Yeah.
Because that is, in my experience, the hardest thing. Because you got great reps delivering the number, and nobody looks at them as the next manager that they want to put in that job. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a good one. This is I honestly think a couple things. First of all, I truly believe in medical devices that the regional manager, district manager is actually the most important, most critical role in the company. And I really and a lot of leaders believe the same way. And that's a story for another day or later on in the podcast. But that's not necessarily why it's difficult. I'll tell you the number one reason why, and this is everyone that I mentor, coach, or develop, they come back to, and this is what they say. They're like, tell me about your management experiences. Well, I haven't managed. How can I'm going to fail, right? It's like, tell me
Hmm.
about your international experience, but you've never worked outside the US. So what do you do, right? And here's what you do. You have to find ways to demonstrate leadership. You demonstrate leadership in your community. You demonstrate leadership at your church. You demonstrate leadership within your team. You demonstrate leadership on a board you serve. Like, there are lots of ways for you to demonstrate leadership. And that's what you have to think about a regional manager, a district manager job. What they're looking for is a leader. And so when they ask that questions, well, tell me a time where you've led a team. Well, I don't have specific district manager experiences, but I can certainly tell you what I've done with this group of individuals in my community
Yep.
or on the board I serve, or even within the region, that you've gone above and beyond. That's what we're looking for. We're always looking for the person to differentiate yourself. Now, if you're going against someone with or multiple candidates with previous management experience, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, but that's again, when you don't get that job, you have to look in, and I know what happens. It's like, well, I didn't get it because all the other candidates had previous manager experience. Well, okay, but how do you make up for that? What can you go do and go create as an individual contributor to create an
Mhm.
environment where I can talk about where I was a leader? A lot of the companies, most of the companies have these employee resource groups, right? And they are
Mhm.
huge. They are, and listen, you can be a man and join the women's network. You can be of Indian descent or Asian descent and join the African American descent. Like and I have another philosophy about ERG groups that there may be too exclusive, but the point being is you go join, go take a leadership role within one of those ERGs. Find those ways, and
Mhm.
companies now, both in pharma and medical devices, have those. you can make a huge
Yeah.
name for yourself. I guarantee you, when I look across Medtronic leaders, all of them had some role to play within an employee resource group. Almost, again,
Mhm.
9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 leaders I can think of. And personally, I was a member of the Women's Network, of the Asian Impacting
Yeah.
Medtronic, and then the African Descent Network. And I was, whether you hold a position, secretary, vice chair, president, or you just are active and
Mhm.
proactive within those employee resource groups.
Yeah, that's so key because I've served in church leadership committee searches and things like that, and the thing it boils down to a lot of times is you're looking for someone who's almost already doing the job. They don't have the job officially. That's just who they are. Leaders look for opportunities to lead in whatever niche and whatever vertical they're in. Right? It's just gonna come out. They're pursuing that, and they have a knack for it, and they're talented, and so they're kind of already blossoming and spreading their wings, even though they may not have the official title yet. And I
That's right.
think that's a lot of what you're saying. Well, you're in Vegas and you're succeeding and you're a manager, and then all of a sudden you go and move, I think, into a corporate accounts role,
Mhm.
which, that role over the years I have seen be an amazing catalyst for people's careers, and I have seen it be the black hole that they can never get out of. And now they want back into a direct sales role or a sales leadership role. They can't get back. They can't get out. How did you first see that role as a next good step, logical step, and then how did you sort of avoid that becoming kind of the pigeonhole that you're stuck in? Because I think there's a lot of people over the years, I know there's a lot of people I've talked to in that role over the years that are just like, I got to get out of this role. I can do it with my eyes closed. I got to get back to the field. So tell us a little bit about that, because
Yeah.
I think people avoid it, but I think it can be just such a great springboard, but then it can become a trap. So just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. First of all, Jordan, you're spot on. You understand this perfectly. And the advice you're giving is on.
Talk to a lot of people. Yeah.
And now I will give you anecdotally, I'll give you my story. And so, and because it truly is a double-edged sword. So the companies are talking about, okay, the pathway into vice president, general managership is going to be in this corporate accounts or enterprise world. Kind of everything is shifted away from corporate accounts more so into enterprise. And the whole idea is saying, okay, now you've been an individual contributor, now you've led people. Now now it's about how do you move a bigger group of people that you don't necessarily have direct responsibility for, and you've got $200 million worth of revenue that's tucked under your belt. So the whole
Yep.
idea is these are the skill sets that you need to actually get to that VP, managing director, general manager type role.
Yeah.
The problem is, and what they don't tell you is there's just X number of VP roles in every company. And there's lots of director of corporate accounts or director of enterprise, lots. And
Mhm.
so you're this highly motivated, flexible individual, and you want to be a VP GM. So you leave the best job in the company as a district manager, regional manager, to become a director of enterprise or corporate accounts. And you're learning, across the organization, you're interacting at a different level, you've got a much higher revenue, but it becomes very cyclical. It's the same job. And once you've mastered it, you got to get out because, and this is Jordan, what people you're talking to tell you, it just beats you up. Now, there are people that love enterprise accounts that have bred there their whole lives. A good friend of mine, a huge mentor, Brian Holmes, uh,
Yep.
this 35 years, this is what he was bred for, and he's amazing at it. And I worked for him and as well. So for me, it was always about keeping a conversation available about what's next. Not just, okay, you're on the track to become a VP, but I'm also open to other things. And so
Mhm.
for me, it was, and you have to do the work, right? I got through a year cycle. I had Shared Clarity at the time, which was a very huge IDN conglomerate. that took national exposure. But I also was saying, "Oh, I'm open to, of course, I'm on the track to become a vice president or GM, but I'm also open to other leadership type opportunities." Well, lo and
Mm-hmm.
behold, the senior director in Canada for cardiac and vascular came open. And my greatest mentor, sponsor, friend, I'm in his office literally, as he's dubbed me Mr. CVG, Mr. Cardiac Vascular Group, he said, "Hey, you think you'd like to try Canada out?" And it was sort of flippant about it, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, "Yeah, that'd be great." And he said,
Yeah.
"Well, it literally," and again, this is the value of, and if we get to talk about mentorship,
Mm-hmm.
sponsorship, friendship, this is the difference. Dave pulled his phone out, sent a text message to the talent acquisition person. "I'd like to add Michael to the candidate list for senior director of Canada." Like that.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
next day I was interviewing for the role.
Yeah.
And so why again, and I don't want to be flippant. I don't want to be, it's
Yeah.
not because Dave and I are friends. It's because I worked for Dave for many years. It's because I took an aortic DM job when they asked me to take that job. And that
Yeah.
it was all, and going back to, raise your hand, volunteer, take chances, particularly when you're young. Be
Yeah.
flexible. Don't get tied down. All those things enabled me to get to where to that point. So um, just circling back to the corporate accounts, enterprise accounts, yes, getting in is critical. Getting
Mm-hmm.
out is even more important. And
Yeah.
you have to be thinking about it immediately once you get into that role, and networking yourself to find that next VP or senior director back in the commercial role.
That's such a great point. And what I have seen over the years, I think that what people will some people will not hear in what you said is that you have to produce. That's the baseline. You have to produce, and in many ways you have to produce extraordinary results. Okay. And people do that, but then they don't take the next step, which is it's about relationships inside, not just outside your company. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with developing relationships and making sure people are aware of your work and that you're platforming your work, because those are the people that have the jobs, and are going to make decisions about the next jobs. And there are just certain people I run into of all generations. I'm not just stereotyping, people my age or whatever, like, well, that's, I don't do that. My work speaks for itself, and I get that. And you will be noticed in some ways, but then they're frustrated a lot of times because they haven't done the other level of work, which is also developing relationships inside the company and further up the chain. It's just the way life works. People are buying from you today because they like you. Well, getting that next promotion is also a form of a purchase. They're buying into someone's career that they like, and they're really, I don't know why that's so hard for people in their brains to figure out, but there are certain people that really are challenged with that. Sounds like, it worked beautifully for you. You moved to Toronto, an amazing city, a beautiful city, an underrated city. I went there for a national sales meeting once with Medtronic. It was gorgeous. I wandered up, skipped out on the meeting, wandered around the city.
It is lovely.
Telling on myself here 20 years later, but
Right.
what was that like? You're now country manager of Canada. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
culture
So
shock. I don't know. Is that a culture shock? It's not that. It's still in the West, but what was
yeah.
it
So,
like?
so here's the interesting thing about Canada, right? So 85% of everything in Canada comes from the US, right? Like I mean, everything is within 50 miles. Like 90% of the buildings is like within 50 miles from the border. However, don't you dare tell a Canadian that they're
They don't
American,
want
right? It's right, and so it's
They don't want to hear they're the 51st state. Is that right?
listen, it is, and it was really my first understanding. And listen, I was I was raised multiracial parents, right? So I was exposed to a couple different cultures, and one was an immigrant from London. So I was exposed to a lot of difference, and I think those were tools that then I go whisked off to Washington D.C., where and I'm at the American University, and my best friend is the forward, the small forward on my team, Marko Krivokapic, right? And he's from the former Yugoslavia, grew up in Montenegro, and so like I had these experiences, and I was open to these experiences, and so going to Canada, yeah, it's still part of North America, but I promise you, Canadians, when they're getting a leader from the US, they automatically think, who's this US person going to come to our country and tell us what to do? And listen, that was when I established the leadership style that has set me on a trail of success. And I use three words very simply, and this is for all managers, really, and maybe all people, but certainly for managers taking on different roles, or certainly anyone going to another country. It's three little words. It's observe, reserve, preserve. And this is what you have to do when you come somewhere new. You have to observe, you have to ask lots of questions. And then you have to reserve your judgment. Because listen, let's face it, we all have biases. I am positive I think I know good ways to do things. But you can't think that others may not know better ways. But if you come in as the leader or the manager and you say, do it my way, you not only wreck the person's motivation, but maybe a better way. So you end up preserving the best. And so the first quarter, I didn't change a single thing. I talked on the phone to everyone. I visited everyone. I asked a ton of questions, and I learned. And then you establish this open communication, this transparent leadership, and it resonates with everyone in the world. I can safely say now, living in Singapore and India and Canada and the US, if people are people, people are people. The same frustrations in Canada or India or Bangladesh is the same. It's, who's this person? Can I trust them? Are they gonna communicate with me? Are they gonna be honest with me? Are they gonna treat me with respect? That's the ribbon of commonality is respect and trust, and it's all done through the right level of communication.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, when you sat down and your country manager of Canada, what challenge do you remember from that role that you knew? Okay, you got there, and these are I know I'm here to observe and preserve and stay reserved, but I'm getting your words out of order. But what was the challenge that you could see as you began to observe that you were going to have to address as a leader there?
Yeah. Number one, they're going to change me. So I had three, terrific leaders, director of marketing, and then two commercial leaders. One of those commercial leaders right now is the vice president at Medtronic with a $2 billion business, Trevor Cook, just an amazing guy. And so people, when a new leader comes in, how did they look at it? Like, are they going to believe what the new leader is saying? And I'll give you an example. Two of those three I mentioned believed me and took me at face value. Right? But they didn't know me. They didn't know what I was saying was going to be true. Well, the third person, no, always questioned it. And you could see it, right? But as a leader, you have to recognize that and just stay the course. And that's all you have to do is stay the course. And sooner than later, I had won all three of them in that same way. And listen, I know that when I talk about my brand, it's coming from a servant's heart. And Jordan, I know that resonates really well with you and your family and your belief system. But I'll tell you, the phrase that I like to use the absolute most, that has given me more success, is serve to empower. And if you think about it, all of us, when we're given responsibility at home, at church, at work,
Yeah.
in our communities, we're empowered. And if you can create a culture or an environment where you're trusted and you give people the power to lead their teams,
Mm-hmm.
to be who they are, then that thing gets pushed down. And that's how you change organizations. And that's, some of the things I enjoyed in India in a very challenging situation. But that's
Oh, we'll get to India. I want to talk about India.
okay.
I definitely want to. That's Canada. I want to talk. I want to talk about India, and I want to talk about Singapore. But you're going back. You're coming back to the United States before you go to
Yeah.
Singapore, and you're coming back to Vegas as the VP of the Western region and the Vice President of hernia
Yeah.
business there for the West. And you're in the chair with the official VP title in the U.S. We'll say over 500 million in revenue, right? At
Yep.
the time, I don't think I'm
Yep.
giving corporate secrets away. Almost 200 plus personnel in the Western US. What is that like to sit down in that chair coming back from Canada? And now, I mean, this is your ship in a sense that you're running. What are the emotions like that first day? What is it
Yeah.
really like? Is it, you feel like you've already been there, or do you feel like, whoa, this is
Well, I'll tell you, I think the first thing was it was kind of just an exhale. I
yeah.
had a couple really strong supporters in Dave Roberts and Devin Brown that really made that happen. And, when you get into the vice president level, it is extremely challenging for
Mhm.
lots of reasons. And again, if you think about what I had said earlier in the podcast, was it's all about diversity. So just think of this is where I'm at. I've worked in cardiac surgery. I've worked in cardiac rhythm. I've worked in aortic. I've worked in neuromodulation and deep brain stimulation. I've gone to Canada for cardiac and vascular. And now I'm coming back to a completely new therapy as a vice president. So again, I share that story not to brag, but to tell you, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to get to where you want to go. But when you diversify your experiences across portfolios, across geographies, you make yourself a really highly valued candidate. And so
Mhm.
it was, I got here. This was my goal. And it was funny because, I talk a lot about branding and building your
Mhm.
brand and culture and how do you create your collateral and, what's your 2 5 10. Anyone who's talked to me in 20 years knows I use what's 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now. And once I got that, so my 10-year goal was to be a vice president. But I forgot to keep moving forward with my goals. Once I became a vice president, I thought,
Right.
okay, well, what now? But this was a fantastic opportunity. I spent 3 years in that role
Yeah.
with West. I had two amazing counterparts, Central VP and an East VP that I like to think we were each other's motivation and rocks.
Mhm.
And we spent so much time together and managed. That was a $2 billion business that the three of us were managing. And again, it's it's no different than when you're a manager. The same things you bring, or a senior director, when you talk about what's the culture. I mean, I was coming from legacy Medtronic into a legacy Covidian culture. So again, that culture might have been bigger than the culture change going to Canada. So again, it's recognizing and realizing when you take over in a vice president role, maybe even as some senior or director level roles, what's the culture? And knowing that there's definitely a culture there, whether you know it or not, there's a culture, and figuring out, is it what you want the culture to be, or how do you start, making those changes to shift that culture? And again, all the
Mhm.
tools that we talked about before: observing, reserving, preserving
Mhm.
people, talent, empowerment, serving others to empower, like spending time with your teams and your extended leadership team on development and teaching the difference between development and promotion, and making sure people realize that everyone is entitled to development. That's how you lead. That's how you win as a leader. And that's how you get your teams to go fight for you. and over those 3 years, I think combined, I probably the West region had done the best from a performance standpoint. I like to think that that's because I pushed that empowerment down. They put down into my senior directors, the senior directors into the managers, and then the managers
Yeah.
how they interacted in the field with the sales reps and individual contributors.
That brings up a point that I've skipped over up to this point, which is, at this point, you're managing leaders of leaders.
Mhm.
But we didn't even talk about the jump between managing individual contributors to
Mhm.
managing managers. Can you kind of delineate that for us? Because that's a whole nother level. You go from being an individual contributor to now you're managing individual contributors. But, you know, tell us about your experience managing managers and then managing managers of managers. I mean, there's a whole different level to that. It would seem like, I've never climbed to that level in an organization. I just manage my brother, but what but he's a handful. Tell us about that experience, because what goes into that? How do you,
Yeah.
how do you treat them differently, or do you treat them differently? What does that look like?
Well, I think if you remove individual contributor or manager and you think
Mhm.
of just people and their experience, and a lot of this will relate back to situational leadership, right? So if I'm managing someone who's a new manager that was an
Mhm.
individual contributor for 10 years, I would potentially manage that person differently than I would manage a 5-year manager with 5 years as an individual contributor. Same way, if it's a 25-year-old sales rep coming out and this is their first med tech job, I'm going to
Yeah.
manage them. So it kind of, there's a situational leadership or a situational like coaching from that standpoint. So it's not as much as title per se; it's understanding where they're at. But it comes right back down to managing managers. Okay, you've got to keep them engaged and motivated. I know that when I was a manager, I wanted to know as much as I possibly could from my boss. So I
Mhm.
took that. And so I am transparent, I am open, I'm honest to the point where I'll say, listen, I'm your manager. I'm supposed to know more than you know. Equally, my manager knows more than I know. But I will share with you all the things that I can. I will come to you with challenges and opportunities. And if I can't tell you, I'll tell you I can't tell you. and
Mhm.
and that's how you build followership. That's ultimately, we haven't talked about relationships and relationship development but directly, but we've been saying it for the last 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Like, being a relationship broker is maybe my number two strength. Maybe it's my number one strength. I just don't say it number one because everyone wants to hear, performance and leadership and delivering results. But being a
Mhm.
relationship broker starts at the individual contributor level, follows all the way up to senior vice president,
Mhm.
that's the key. If you can master relationships, because that's what it is, that's what it all comes down to. And the more relationships you have and how you expose yourself, how you learn other people, all helps you. You can't, like, I was just talking to one of my best friends today or yesterday, and I said, my first year as a vice president, I learned one of the most valuable things that I've taken with me. So that was 2018.
Okay.
Life is a bell shaped curve, and certainly our jobs are bell shaped curves, meaning 10% of people are going to absolutely love you. They're going to love the way you look. They're going to love everything you say. They're just going to love you. They're going to be instant followers. Likewise, or conversely, 10% of people are going to hate you. They're going to don't think you deserve the job. They're not going to like the color of your skin or your gender. They're going to think their best friend should have got the job. Whatever. That's 10%. The key is, how do you move the middle?
Yeah.
How do you talk to 80% of your team? Whether it's a small team or a large organization. And this lesson helped me as I grew into 200 to 300 to 800 people in India that I was responsible for. But if you think that way and you don't get caught up, like patting yourself on the back to the people that love you automatically just because they do, and you also
Mhm.
don't get stuck in the weeds when people don't like you, because it's just life. But if you really focus on that middle 80% and think about how do I appeal to, and this is one of the hardest, toughest senior leadership lessons, is that
Mhm.
you have to manage to the middle because that's the majority of your people, right? We know that roughly from an AOP standpoint, about 65% for a successful business or operating unit or company, you need around 65% to be over plan. And this is just kind of a marker. Now, it seems really low, right? But you're talking about you're going to have your Eagles at 120% or 130%, right?
It's gonna all end
Then
down.
you have
Yeah.
your laggers, right? But so that's how, that's the mix that you talk about or that we talk about a lot when we look how many people, like the health of the organization or how you are against AOP. These are little lessons you kind of learn along the way. But again, a lot of it comes down to relationships. And that was really my point there in, in,
Yeah.
in how you lead.
I'm curious, this is not on my questions, but it just comes to mind as you talk. You have had the ability in your career to continue to grow. And if you think of your career as kind of a cascade, but it's going up, you hit certain levels and then you grow to the next level. And whatever that next level requires, you don't just do that well, you do it really well and you move to the next level and your revenue responsibility grows. And then the amount of people you're responsible for grows. And then you go into international leadership. What do you think or what do you attribute that to in your personal makeup or your life set of experiences? Because a lot of people don't, they get a certain level and they plateau, but you keep growing. Was it basketball? Was it formed on the court when you're in fifth grade and you had to step up? Or where does this come from? I mean, people are always, West Point spends a lot of money developing leaders, right, for the military and stuff like that. I've met them. They don't always get to the vice president level or country manager level. So what do you attribute some of this to?
Yeah. So there's a couple things I want to say here. Let's see if I can say them quickly and concisely. I think the first thing comes to mind is it's desire.
Okay.
You like and being really intentional. I think those are the things. And for me, like when I talk about a 2, 5, 10 year, career aspiration, that was, in those 20 years between Pfizer and Medtronic, I was very intentional. Like, I mean, I said to myself, I want to do this job. I want to be really good at it. I pride myself a ton on saying I've never left any job worse than I found it.
Mhm.
But I also want to take advantage of, at the time, this great Medtronic company that had so many different business units and opportunities from a global perspective. I think that I worked for an international company. My mom is a Londoner, born and raised. I've traveled to 50 countries. So, like wanting to work and live outside the US, that's within me. But the
Yeah.
comment, I want to bring this back to maybe larger part of your audience. And I really hope that, like, particularly managers that are listening,
Mhm.
there's a lot of managers that feel stuck.
Yeah.
And they are living in California or living in Seattle or Texas. They're married, they
Mhm.
have children, they have a really good life, but they can't move. They,
Mhm.
they're confined to relocation, and certainly being single, being super flexible, aggressively flexible, maybe has helped my career. But I want people to understand, like when you look at life and you look at values, and that's probably a whole nother podcast, but the things that really make you happy, like that's like integrity, trustworthiness, high expectations, leadership, performance. Yeah, those are great values, but those are like your company's values. What are your values as an individual,
Mhm.
right? Like freedom or relationships or being able to do what you want to do or family time or how you associate to your church and your community. Like those are actually life values, and those are the ones that actually help you make decisions. So what I'm really trying to say here for those managers that are feeling a little stuck and that because they can't move, they think they're not getting an opportunity. I always come back to them and I ask them what's the most important thing to them. And I'm telling you, 80%, 90% of the time, it's where I live, my husband, my wife, my children. And I remind them,
Hmm.
you're getting your number one. Just so you know, you're getting your number one. And
Yes,
and I'm telling you,
that's
that
right.
has that really
Mhm.
resonates with a lot of people, particularly when you look at someone like me in my career where I've had 11 different jobs. Well, I also don't have a wife or children, right? So, yes, I'm getting all these phenomenal opportunities,
Mhm.
but you're also getting your your wife, your husband, your children, your community.
You're
You're living where you want to live, and those are the things that are important. So I just want to give balance to, I don't ever want people to think that I don't understand my ability to have lived in multiple countries, to taken on multiple jobs, because it's an easier decision when it's just one person. And so I recognize that, but I just want to make sure you also recognize that if you're frustrated because you're not getting promoted because you can't relocate, don't forget you're getting your number ones.
that's so great. It's such a great point. And it sounds like, you've helped people find their true north,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes just recognizing and opening their eyes, like, you know what? I really am where I want to be. I could, maybe in the back half of my life, take some of those international assignments or something if they're presented to me. But right now, for where I am, this is what I want to be doing, and helping them see that and kind of get over maybe some dissatisfaction they have. Well, overseas came calling again for you, and you went off to Singapore. And that's just absolutely amazing. Many people listening to this will never go to Singapore unless, maybe on vacation. Maybe they'll want to after they hear you talk about it. But what was that like? What was your first experience getting off the plane, or had you been there before? I know you like to travel,
Yeah.
so maybe you knew about Singapore and you knew it was a place you wanted to be. But how did that all come about?
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
it like
Thanks.
living?
Yeah. There's three countries or cities that I immediately landed in and said, I would love to work here. So again, that whole vision board, it really is something. So Singapore happened to be one of the three. Hong Kong and Sydney are the other two. Haven't made it there yet. But
Okay.
I remember visiting about 8 years ago with my mom. We were hanging out in
Mhm.
Singapore and we're like, oh my God, this country is amazing, as well as the gateway to Southeast Asia. So fast forward, and now I did move there right after COVID. So that was some unique challenges. But to move to Singapore, which is really the gateway to this, like the best gateway to Southeast
Mhm.
Asia. And then also to get a job where I'm responsible of 11 Southeast Asian countries. It couldn't,
Yeah.
it honestly, it, the way things worked out, it was a perfect setup to then go to India 18 months later. But because it was like Asia light. There were three main countries: Bangladesh,
Okay.
Philippines, and Indonesia, that I focused my efforts and had country leaders. But a lot of the
Mhm.
challenges and problems and issues that I dealt with immediately, I also, was able to fix the same type things in India. So the experience was awesome. One, it allowed me to travel to those countries that are third world countries,
Mhm.
or developing countries, um, but live in Singapore. So a lot of security, similar to when I went to play basketball in Washington D.C. I lived in Northwest Washington D.C., and anyone that knows that area, that's Georgetown and the best part of there, the safest part. So I'm in this really safe community in a very dangerous place at the time. And I think the same thing is I went to the office in Singapore, beautiful country, amazing people, but yet then was able to really learn three separate types of cultures between, trust me, Philippines, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, or the subcontinent of India, are three totally different leaders, managers, people. So it was a lot of the same things that I would, people are people, and how, what's your philosophy? How do you coach? How do you teach? That observe, reserve, preserve works in Southeast Asia too. Empowering people. Yep, it works
Yeah.
with
Sorry to interrupt. My mind is just going all over the place because, you've mentioned three, but I also saw Nepal, Bhutan, Fiji, Guam, New Guinea, Brunei, I
Brunei.
think.
Yeah.
Um, what's unique about, I mean, anybody, over here in the United States is going to wonder, okay, what's different about leadership and sales business in these guys? What unique challenges present themselves over there that we might just be totally out of our depth in?
Well, here's the first one. Everyone outside the US or every developing country pays for their healthcare. There is no reimbursement. There is no reimbursement in Nepal or Bhutan or Bangladesh or Fiji. There's none in the Philippines or Indonesia. Indonesia has 204 million people, the fourth largest populated country. There's no reimbursement. Bangladesh
All out of
has
pocket. They're paying
all out of
for their
pocket,
help.
all out of pocket. So when
Mhm.
you ask what's the biggest difference, is my focus, the 3 years I spent outside the US in Asia and India or APAC was I focused on really three things. The first thing was a big one. It's about how do you build awareness, and then how do you create access? How do you
Mhm.
make it affordable? And then how ultimately is it adopted, right? The 4 A's of marketing. Then it's about portfolio expansion. So for a company like Medtronic that has multiple portfolios, how do you open up more opportunities to drive revenue and ultimately serve more patients? And the third piece is around customer engagement. And what you'll
Mhm.
find is in these developing markets, there are some of the smartest people in the world and smartest physicians. So when you're bringing these therapies, you just have to find a way to make it affordable, or you have to make
Mhm.
sure that the people that can afford it have access to it. And so that's the biggest difference when you move to developing markets versus, when there's no reimbursement. And, I a lot of times I talk about when you're in markets outside the US, it's all about exponential growth. It's not really
Mhm.
about hitting AOP or not AOP, because you're growing at 10, 12, sometimes 20% a year. And that's the idea, right? And that's when you know when you've lived a career of healthcare, the ultimate win is how do you bring access to these therapies to more people? And that's
Mhm.
part of every mission statement of these companies, and that's the biggest difference.
Mhm. Access, affordability, exposure. Yeah, that's quite different than here, and I'm sure you're probably presented on an ongoing basis of some really sad situations where people need, cardiac surgery procedure, they need stents, and it's a difference between life and death, and it boils down to cost
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well,
Probably, yeah. That.
I mean, I just give you the stories, right? I mean, if grandma needs a pacemaker,
Hmm.
okay, it's bought from the family, from 20 members of the family pitch in to get
Yeah.
grandma a pacemaker. Right? Like, I mean, these are hundreds of stories every day. Not These aren't one-offs. These are
Yeah. Yeah.
hundreds
No,
of
it's done.
stories.
That's how it's done, huh?
That's
Okay.
how it's done.
Wow. Well, you went from Singapore to India
Yeah.
after a bit. What was the genesis of that move? What was it? Obviously, it's a bigger market. India, I think you went. I mean, into a role where you more than doubled your responsibility for revenue, 800 plus
Yeah.
employees, bigger organization, bigger footprint. Um, what changed there in that role in that move from Singapore to India?
Well, so there was a company restructure, and at the end of the day, my boss, he asked me if I would go to India and cover it for Medtronic. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier on: is how do you get chits? How do you do favors so people will do favors for you on the backside, right? Or when do you make a decision that's good for the organization? And we haven't talked about that a lot, but
Mhm.
there is that balance, right? That sometimes I say this all the time. Sometimes you, like, closing a quarter is a good example. Sometimes you put that extra order in for yourself. Sometimes you do it for your manager, and sometimes you do it for the company. And sometimes you have to do it
Yeah.
for all three. And I think
Yeah.
understanding kind of the cycle of medical device sales. But I've always tried to trade up.
Hmm.
I had already had an amazing 16, 18 months in Singapore and Southeast Asia countries. And so when Feng Dong and Rodney Pereira had asked I had some reluctance. I'm not going to say that I didn't hesitate, because
Yeah.
ultimately I wanted to get back to the U.S. and to some like global role back in the
Yeah.
U.S., or back to Singapore.
Mhm.
But I took a trip there and came back, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. And you hope that and we haven't talked about another big issue. When you talk about sacrifice or choice, I don't really like the word sacrifice. I think most things are actually choices. People just like to use the word sacrifice when they want to make themselves feel better. But it was a choice. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a choice. I could have, stayed in Singapore and done something, or been sent back to the U.S. But I think that it was the right choice for me, and it was certainly the right choice for the company. And so I made that, and I
Yeah.
am so happy. I mean, that I went. I have some amazing friends. I had an even better international experience. I am a better person. I am more humbled, um, with that experience, and going to India. And my commute to the office was very challenging. And I'm not talking
Really?
about terrible traffic. I'm talking about seeing people living on the streets,
Yeah.
living, hundreds of people, from that perspective, living on the streets, and a hardship, and working for a company that's delivering healthcare. So again, when I talk
Mhm.
about the importance of bringing, portfolio expansion, or how helping other people, like, that's really what it was about. It was, how
Yeah.
can we bring more therapies to more people?
Hmm. That's amazing. I just practical question, what is personally, I mean, that's obviously a very difficult situation to see people living on the street, but I'm just thinking about personally living in Singapore or India and just meals and buying groceries and finding where the gym is and stuff. What, I mean, you seem like a guy that thinks way ahead of that stuff, probably not a problem. Me, I'd be wandering around lost every day. What did you find personally most challenging about living in India or Singapore? Or, obviously you got over the hump, but what, just from a practical American standpoint for those of us over here, what did you find to
Yeah.
be challenging?
So I'll set this answer up. So when I made the decision to go to Singapore, I decided to move 10,000 miles away from every person I knew, to a country I knew no one. And I chose to do it as a local employee. So I lost my US benefits. And so that's pretty gutsy, but I'm only setting this up that what's in all of our hearts. I missed my family. I missed my mom, and I missed my friends. And that was by far the most difficult thing. Singapore is a beautiful country, and there's access to
Mm-hmm.
everything. India is a little different challenge, but the only thing that and again, and Jordan, I know this one hits you perfectly. The value of relationships, the value of the people, your loved ones. There is there is no replacement. None.
Yeah. Yeah.
None.
Yeah. Wise words. I mean, I could definitely see that. You're back home. You're in the U.S.
Yeah.
Uh, in between assignments right now. What if you script it out? Maybe we close out with what's in your sights. What do you want to do next? What's your thoughts with?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, this is great. So Medtronic was great to me. They were really awesome. Got me back to the US, which was good. Got me
Yeah.
back to mom. Um, you know, had me on for a while to see if there was going to be a good fit. There ended up not being a good fit, or at this time. And so, um, I think understanding that there's life after Medtronic for me, but there's also life after a 5 or 10 or 15-year career. I think, as this podcast is meant for advice at all levels, I think sometimes you got to bet on yourself. Sometimes you have to not take the easy route, and find out something else. And I think over the last couple months, it's really sunk in that I'm really at a great point in my life. And
Mhm.
when you get to that point in your life, wherever you're at, the right things come along, the right opportunities come along. And as I've talked to several companies, like I've done my career trajectory, I've done my aspiration, I've done my 2, 5, 10 year. Now I'm looking for an opportunity to really contribute to the organization. I want to find something that's mission driven, that focuses on patients, whether that's in New York or Singapore or England. And
Yeah.
so I feel at peace, and
Hmm.
that's a good place to be, and not in a hurry, and just
Yeah.
hoping some great opportunity will come my way soon.
I have no doubt it will. Wealth of experience that you're bringing, Michael.
Cool.
Thank you for being on. I would love to have you back. Each one of these countries could be a completely separate topic, separate conversation. But I appreciate you doing, kind of a flyover of some of your experiences. I mean,
Sure.
it's phenomenal, and would love to have you back.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's my pleasure, Jordan. We are friends for a long time, and
yeah.
I'm the one to be honored here. And it sounds like you are helping more people, which is the name of the game. And I commend you and what you and your brother are doing. So just keep up the good work, and anything I can do to help, you know where to find me.
I appreciate that. Absolutely.